The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual mix of translated chatter and diplomatic posturing. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered for their monthly meeting, though most were already mentally checking out and planning their lunch orders. That was until Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrin Empire stood up, his forearms spread wide in what he probably thought was an impressive gesture. "Fellow council members," Vextar announced, his voice booming through the translation matrix, "I come before you today with a proposal that will shake the very foundations of galactic politics." Chancellor Griselda of the Mollusk Confederation immediately perked up, her eye stalk swiveling toward the Admiral with the kind of attention usually reserved for impending disasters. Commander Thok of the Granite Warriors simply grunted, which in his species was somewhere between polite acknowledgement and mild indigestion. Ambassador Pip of the Squeaky Folk nervously adjusted his tiny spectacles and began taking frantic notes. "As we all know," Vextar continued, clearly enjoying having the room's attention, "there exists in this galaxy a planet so defenseless, so pathetically unprepared for conflict, that it borders on criminal negligence. I speak, of course, of the third planet in the Sol system, Earth." A collective intake of breath swept through the chamber, though it sounded more like a mix of sighs and barely suppressed groans. Several representatives suddenly found their data pads incredibly fascinating. Ambassador Pip dropped his stylus. "Think about it," Vextar pressed on, oblivious to the room's shifting mood. "One measly planet, no planetary shields, no orbital defense platforms. Their most advanced weapons are little metal projectiles that they fire at each other. They haven't even figured out energy weapons yet. And their space program? Please. They celebrate launching tiny tin cans into their own orbit like they've conquered the universe." Commander Thok shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair, the metal groaning under his rocky bulk. "Admiral Vextar, perhaps you should reconsider." "Reconsider?" Vextar laughed, a sound like a garbage disposal having an argument with a blender. "Commander, I've done my research. These humans spend most of their time fighting each other over invisible lines on maps and who gets to control little black rocks buried in the ground. They're so busy arguing about their primitive fuel sources that they haven't noticed their sitting ducks for any species with half a brain and a decent starship." Chancellor Griselda's eye stalks drooped noticeably. "Admiral, there are considerations you might not be aware of." "Considerations?" Vextar waved a dismissive hand. "Chancellor, with all due respect, you mollusks have always been overly cautious. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks. And this isn't even a risk. It's a guaranteed victory parade." Ambassador Pip squeaked something that might have been a warning, but it was so high-pitched that the translation matrix just rendered it as nervous chittering. The little alien was practically vibrating in his seat now, looking like he wanted to crawl under his desk and hide. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary entities," Vextar proclaimed, spreading all four arms wide again, "I propose we stop pretending this Earth situation isn't the elephant in the room, or the giant space whale in the nebula, if you prefer. Here we have an entire planet full of resources, a strategic location in a previously unexplored arm of the galaxy, and inhabitants so primitive they still use chemical propulsion for space travel. Chemical propulsion! In the year 4387 Galactic Standard." The Admiral began pacing, his excitement building like a used car salesman who'd just spotted someone with terrible credit and a desperate need for transportation. "Their defensive capabilities are so laughable that I've seen kindergarten science projects with better shielding, no energy barriers, no quantum disruption fields, no antimatter cannons. Nothing. They're basically serving themselves up on a silver platter with a side of their own gravy." More uncomfortable shifting around the room. Several delegates were now actively avoiding eye contact with Vextar, studying the ceiling with sudden interest in the architectural details of the thousand-year-old chamber. "I've already prepared a preliminary invasion fleet," Vextar announced proudly. 3 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and a support frigate. Honestly, that's probably overkill, but I want to make sure we put on a good show. Maybe we'll even let them surrender peacefully first, just to be sporting about it." Chancellor Griselda made a sound like air escaping from a very tired balloon. "Admiral, please. If you would just listen to the historical records." "Historical records of what?" Vextar interrupted. "Chancellor, show me one example of Earth mounting any kind of meaningful defense against a superior force. Show me their hidden fleet of battlecruisers. Show me their secret weapons program. You can't, because they don't exist." The Admiral's confidence was now reaching levels typically reserved for politicians during campaign season. "Face the facts, Council members. Earth is the low-hanging fruit of galactic conquest. It's so low-hanging it's practically on the ground, already bruised and begging to be picked up." Ambassador Pip had given up on taking notes and was now holding his head in his tiny hands, making soft whimpering sounds that the translation matrix was rendering as "oh no, oh no, oh no" on repeat. "The motion is simple," Vextar concluded with a theatrical flourish. "The Zephyrine Empire requests official council recognition of our claim to the Sol system, effective immediately upon successful occupation. Which, let's be honest, should take about 15 minutes once we drop out of hyperspace." The silence that followed was so profound that you could have heard a pin drop, assuming pins made sounds when they dropped in the vacuum of space, which they didn't, but the metaphor stood anyway. Finally, Commander Thaw cleared his throat with a sound like two boulders grinding together. "All in favor?" 3 days later, aboard the Zephyrin flagship Inevitable Victory, Admiral Vextar was practically bouncing in his command chair as he reviewed the intelligence reports. His lieutenant, Captain Zorb, stood at attention nearby, clutching a datapad with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered fire and was eager to burn down the forest. "Captain Zorb," Vextar said, barely containing his glee, "tell me you have good news about our target." "Sir, it's even better than we hoped," Zorb replied, his voice cracking with excitement. "These humans are absolutely perfect victims. They spend most of their time engaged in ritualized combat with each other." "Ritualized combat?" Vextar leaned forward, intrigued. "Yes, sir. They gather in massive groups to watch other humans engage in territorial disputes over small parcels of land. The combatants wear different colored uniforms and fight viciously for control of a tiny sphere or oval-shaped object. The crowds become so frenzied they sometimes riot when their chosen warriors lose." Vextar nodded approvingly. "Primitive tribal warfare. Excellent. They're already conditioned for conquest. What about their military capabilities?" Zorb consulted his datapad with the confidence of someone who'd completely missed the point. "Sir, they have something they call action movies, where they document their most advanced combat techniques. I've studied hundreds of hours of these training videos. Their weapons are laughably primitive, mostly projectile-based, and their vehicles explode if you look at them wrong." "Exploding vehicles?" Vextar raised an eyebrow. "That seems counterproductive." "Exactly, sir. And get this, they actually film these training exercises and broadcast them for entertainment. They're so confident in their weakness that they show their military tactics to anyone who wants to watch. I've learned all about their special forces operations. Apparently, their most elite warriors spend most of their time diving away from explosions in slow motion." The Admiral chuckled, a sound like a coffee grinder having an existential crisis. "What about their space defenses?" "Non-existent, sir. They have a few small outposts orbiting their planet, but the inhabitants seem to spend most of their time conducting zero-gravity experiments with floating water droplets. Their defensive strategy appears to be taking pictures of their own planet and broadcasting their location to anyone with a radio receiver." "They're broadcasting their own coordinates?" Vextar couldn't believe his luck. "Constantly, sir. They have something called the Internet where they post detailed maps of their cities, real-time traffic patterns, and even the schedules of their leaders' public appearances. It's like they're trying to make invasion planning as easy as possible." Captain Zorb was really hitting his stride now, flipping through pages of completely misunderstood human behavior. "Oh, and sir, they have a daily ritual where millions of them climb into metal boxes and move in slow, predictable patterns along predetermined routes. They call it rush hour traffic. I believe this is some sort of military drill, but it's so inefficient that it actually makes them more vulnerable to attack." "Rush hour traffic?" Vextar repeated slowly, savoring the words. "You mean they voluntarily trap themselves in metal containers in predictable locations at the same time every day?" "Yes, sir. And they get angry about it, but they keep doing it anyway. I think it might be some sort of religious observance." Vexstar stood up and began pacing, his excitement building. "Captain, this is almost too easy. What about their leadership structure?" "Completely chaotic, sir. They can't agree on anything. They have different groups of humans who spend most of their time arguing with each other about everything from economic policy to whether certain foods belong on round, flat bread discs. They've actually divided their planet into separate territories and compete with each other over who can accumulate the most small green pieces of paper." "They fight over paper?" "Apparently so, sir, and not even good paper, flimsy stuff that tears easily. They also worship various invisible entities and can't agree on which invisible entity is the correct one to worship. Honestly, sir, I'm starting to think this might be too easy. It almost feels unsporting." Admiral Vexstar waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, Captain. Sometimes the universe hands you a gift, and you don't question it. You just say thank you and cash the check." "There is one thing that's slightly puzzling, sir," Zorb said, consulting his notes again. "I've been monitoring their communication networks, and they seem to have an unusual number of fictional stories about alien invasions. They appear to spend a lot of time imagining what they would do if a superior alien force attacked their planet." "Oh, really?" Vexstar was intrigued. "And what do these fantasies involve?" "Well, sir, the scenarios vary, but they usually involve the aliens being defeated by some combination of computer viruses, nuclear weapons, or large groups of humans working together. Sometimes they defeat the aliens by giving them Earth bacteria, or by finding a weakness in the alien technology." Vexstar laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. "Computer viruses? Against a Zephyrian battleship? Captain, their most advanced computers are barely capable of playing moving pictures. And nuclear weapons? Those primitive fusion devices couldn't dent our hull plating if they detonated them inside the ship." "That's what I thought, sir. I think these stories are just wishful thinking. Like bedtime stories for children who are afraid of the dark." "Exactly, Captain. Sometimes primitive species create mythology to help them cope with their own helplessness. It's actually rather sad when you think about it." Zorb nodded enthusiastically. "Should I continue monitoring their communications, sir?" "By all means, Captain. I want to know everything about our soon-to-be subjects, their weaknesses, their fears, their favorite flavors of those paper-thin bread discs you mentioned. Knowledge is power, and power is what separates the conquerors from the conquered." As Captain Zorb saluted and left to continue his research, Admiral Vexstar settled back in his command chair with the satisfaction of a predator who'd just spotted the slowest member of the herd. This was going to be easier than taking candy from a juvenile blobitarian. 2 weeks later, the Zephyrian war fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, with all the subtlety of a meteor shower hitting a glass factory. Admiral Vexstar stood on the bridge of the inevitable victory, watching the tactical display with the smug satisfaction of someone who just discovered their lottery ticket was a winner. "Captain Zorb, status report," he commanded, adjusting his dress uniform for maximum intimidation factor. "Our ship's reporting ready, sir," Zorb replied, practically vibrating with excitement. 15 vessels in perfect formation. We're currently 4.2 billion kilometers from the target planet. Long-range sensors are picking up their primitive orbital installations just as predicted." "Excellent. And their response to our arrival?" Zorb checked his instruments, frowning slightly. "Well, sir, they've definitely detected us. Their communication networks are buzzing with activity, but they don't seem to be panicking exactly." "Not panicking?" Vexstar raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps they haven't fully grasped the situation yet. What kind of activity?" "It's strange, sir. Most of the chatter seems to be coming from something called social media. Apparently millions of humans are posting about our arrival, but they're treating it like entertainment. One human posted, 'Finally something interesting to break up the Monday news cycle.' Another said, 'Dibs on the alien technology when they inevitably lose.'" Admiral Vexstar chuckled. "Primitive minds coping with incomprehensible terror through humor. A classic defense mechanism. What about their military response?" "That's the odd part, sir. Their military seems remarkably calm. We're intercepting communications from something called NORAD, and they're treating this like a routine occurrence. One officer actually said, and I quote, Log it as Contact Event 847B and add them to the Wednesday briefing agenda. Contact Event 8047B? Vexstar's confidence wavered for exactly 0.3 seconds before reasserting itself. Clearly some sort of primitive filing system for astronomical phenomena. They probably catalog every meteor and space debris as a contact event. That must be it, sir, Zorb agreed, though he sounded slightly less certain than before. Should we begin the approach to attack range? By all means, Captain. Take us in at maximum intimidation speed. I want our arrival to be visible from their planet's surface. Let them see the futility of resistance. The Zephyrian fleet began its approach, engines blazing with theatrical flair. Vexstar had specifically ordered the formation to look as menacing as possible, ships arranged in a classic Death Star pattern that had worked on dozens of primitive civilizations before. As they crossed into the outer solar system, Captain Zorb's instruments began picking up more detailed readings. Sir, I'm detecting several small vessels moving to intercept us. Looks like 6 ships total. 6 ships? Vexstar laughed. Against our 15 heavy cruisers? This is almost insulting. What are their specifications? Zorb studied his readouts, looking puzzled. Sir, that's the strange thing. I can't get clear readings on their hull composition or weapons systems. The energy signatures don't match anything in our database. Also, they're not moving in any recognizable attack formation. In fact, one of them appears to be drifting sideways while rotating slowly. Probably broken down, Vexstar dismissed. Their technology is so primitive they can barely keep their ships operational. What about communications? Have they attempted to contact us? Actually, yes, sir. We're receiving a transmission now. It's coming from the lead vessel. Excellent. Put it on the main screen. I want the entire bridge crew to witness Earth's pathetic plea for mercy. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a human face that looked remarkably bored. The human appeared to be middle-aged, wearing what looked like a casual uniform, and was sipping from a small container while looking at something off-screen. Oh, hello there, the human said, glancing up at the camera with the enthusiasm of someone answering a telemarketing call during dinner. This is Captain Riley of the Earth Defense Coordination Office. You folks are the Zephyrians, right? Yeah, we've been tracking your approach since you left your home system. Nice fleet, by the way. Very traditional. Admiral Vexstar stared at the screen, momentarily thrown off balance. This wasn't going according to script. I am Admiral Vexstar of the Zephyrian Empire, he began, trying to regain his composure. You will surrender your planet immediately or face the consequences of... Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there, Captain Riley interrupted, holding up a hand. Let me guess. You've done your research, you think we're primitive and defenseless, and you figure this is going to be an easy conquest. Does that about sum it up? How did you... Vexstar sputtered. Lucky guess, Riley said dryly. Look, Admiral, no offense, but you're not exactly breaking new ground here. Do you have any idea how many species have shown up with that exact same speech? We've actually got a bingo card for invasion cliches. Let me see. Surrender or face the consequences is the free space in the middle. Captain Zorb leaned over to his admiral and whispered urgently, Sir, this human seems to know about other alien species. That shouldn't be possible based on our intelligence. Your intelligence, Riley continued, apparently having heard the whispered comment despite the vast distance between ships, is adorable, by the way. We particularly enjoyed your lieutenant's analysis of our rush-hour traffic as military exercises. That one's definitely going in the quarterly humor compilation. Admiral Vexstar felt the first cold tendril of doubt creeping into his mind. You've been monitoring our communications? Monitoring? Riley took another sip from his container. Admiral, we've been watching your entire species since you first achieved interstellar flight. Did you really think you could cross half the galaxy without anyone noticing? We've got detailed files on your ship configurations, your tactics, your favorite foods, and that embarrassing incident with the space dolphins near the Rigel system. The bridge of the inevitable victory fell silent except for the sound of Captain Zorb's confidence deflating like a punctured balloon. Now, Riley continued in the same conversational tone, Would you like to know why nobody attacks Earth? Or should I let you figure it out the hard way? Admiral Vextar straightened in his command chair, trying to salvage what remained of his intimidating first impression. Captain Riley, you seem to be under the impression that your little planet poses some sort of threat to the mighty Zephyrin Empire. I assure you, whatever primitive defenses you managed to cobble together— Oh, defenses? Riley interrupted, looking genuinely amused. Admiral, you're thinking about this all wrong. We don't really do defenses anymore. Haven't needed them for about 30 years now. What we do have is what you might call a comprehensive threat management system. Captain Zorb frantically typed on his console, cross-referencing every database they had. Sir, he whispered urgently, there's no record of any human threat management system in our intelligence files. That's because, Riley said, apparently still able to hear their whispered conversations across several million kilometers of space, your intelligence files are based on what we let you see. Which, to be fair, is pretty much just cat videos and cooking shows. We figured if anyone was going to invade us, we might as well let them think we're harmless. Admiral Vextar felt a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. Impossible. We've monitored your communications for years. We know your technological capabilities. You've monitored the communications we broadcast on purpose, Riley corrected patiently. Do you really think a species that's mastered interstellar travel would still be using radio waves for their sensitive military communications? Come on, Admiral. Give us a little credit. Riley paused to take another sip from his container, which Vextar was beginning to suspect might be some kind of Earth battle stimulant. Let me ask you something. In all your research on humanity, did you ever wonder why we call our planet Earth? It's your word for dirt, isn't it? Zorb offered hesitantly. Exactly, Riley nodded approvingly. We named our entire planet Dirt. Does that strike you as the behavior of a species that takes itself too seriously? Or does it maybe suggest we've got a slightly different perspective on things than your average galactic civilization? Admiral Vextar was starting to feel like he'd walked into a trap, but he couldn't quite see the jaws yet. What's your point, human? My point, Admiral, is that we've been playing the long game while everyone else has been playing galactic conquest. While your species was busy building bigger guns and shinier ships, we were asking different questions. Like, what if we didn't need to fight at all? And what if we made fighting us so inconvenient that nobody wanted to bother? Riley leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards. For instance, did you know that you're actually the 847th species to show up here with conquest in mind? 847? Vextar's voice cracked slightly. Well, 848 if you count the Galactic Jehovah's Witnesses, but they were just trying to convert us to their religion, so we put them in a different category. Point is, you're not exactly blazing new trails here. Captain Zorb was now frantically scanning through their intelligence files, looking increasingly pale. Sir, there are no records of 800 other species visiting Earth. That level of interstellar traffic should have been impossible to hide. Should have been, Riley agreed. But then again, most species aren't expecting us to have mastered technologies that technically shouldn't exist yet. Like, for example, localized probability manipulation. Localized what now? Admiral Vextar asked weakly. Oh, you know, basic reality adjustment. Nothing too fancy. We just make it so that anyone looking for us from outside the solar system experiences a sort of statistical unlikelihood of finding anything interesting here. Your sensors see exactly what we want them to see, your databases record exactly what we want them to record, and your intelligence agencies report exactly what we want them to report. Riley gestured vaguely toward the view screen. We've been running a galaxy-wide perception filter for the better part of a century. As far as most civilizations are concerned, Earth is just another unremarkable rock orbiting an unremarkable star. Occasionally someone slips through the cracks, like yourselves, but that's actually intentional. We need a steady trickle of visitors to keep our systems calibrated. The Admiral felt like he was drowning in confusion. But why? Why go to such elaborate lengths to appear weak? Because, Riley said with the patience of a teacher explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly slow student, appearing weak means nobody bothers us. And when nobody bothers us, we don't have to bother them. It's what we like to call a mutually beneficial misunderstanding. But surely, Vexstar protested desperately, you can't expect me to believe that humans have developed technology superior to the combined knowledge of the Galactic Council. Riley's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Admiral, let me put this in terms you might understand. Your species achieved interstellar flight by building really big engines and pointing them at really distant stars. Admirable, in a brute force sort of way. Our approach was to ask why we needed to go anywhere when we could just convince space to rearrange itself around us. Captain Zorb dropped his datapad. Sir, that's impossible. You can't just manipulate space-time without massive energy expenditures and quantum resonance destabilizers and exotic matter containment systems, Riley finished. Yeah, that's the hard way. We skipped all that and went straight to convincing reality that it wanted to cooperate. Turns out the universe is a lot more flexible than most species assume. Admiral Vexstar stared at the human on the screen, feeling his worldview crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. You're lying. This is all some elaborate bluff. Maybe, Riley shrugged. Tell you what, Admiral, I'm going to transfer you to our welcome wagon protocol. You'll be added to our official database as potential threat number 12,847, right between the crystalline hive mind of Sector 7 and the really annoying door-to-door salespeople from the Andromeda Galaxy. Congratulations, you've achieved statistical significance. The view screen flickered, and suddenly Admiral Vexstar was looking at what appeared to be a standard bureaucratic interface. Text scrolled past in neat, organized rows. Threat assessment. Minimal. Recommended response, polite discouragement. Estimated resolution time, 15 minutes. Probability of repeat visits, 12%. Please hold while we connect you to the next available reality adjustment specialist. This has to be some kind of joke, Vexstar muttered. Oh, it definitely is. Riley's voice came through the speakers. The joke's just not on us. All right, Admiral, Riley said, his voice taking on the tone of a tired customer service representative. I can see you're having trouble processing this information. That's completely normal. About 60% of visiting species go through what we call the denial phase. Would you like me to provide a practical demonstration, or would you prefer to continue believing we're bluffing? Admiral Vexstar looked around his bridge at his crew, all of whom were staring at their instruments with expressions ranging from confusion to barely controlled panic. A demonstration of what exactly? Oh, just some basic applications of our harmless primitive technology, Riley replied, making air quotes that somehow managed to be visible through pure sarcasm. Nothing too dramatic. We don't want to accidentally delete any solar systems today. It's only Tuesday, and we've already had 2 interdimensional incidents this week. Captain Zorb leaned over to his admiral. Sir, perhaps we should consider a strategic withdrawal. Absolutely not, Vexstar snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. These humans are clearly running some sort of elaborate psychological warfare campaign. Smoke and mirrors, Captain. All smoke and mirrors. If you say so, Admiral, Riley said cheerfully. Okay, let's start with something simple. You see that asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter? Vexstar glanced at the tactical display, where their sensors clearly showed the standard collection of space rocks orbiting between the 4th and 5th planets. What about it? Well, that used to be a planet. We called it Steve. Steve was a perfectly nice planet until about 200 years ago, when the Blorgon Empire decided to test their new Planet Cracker superweapon on what they thought was an uninhabited rock in our solar system. The Admiral felt his throat go dry. What happened to the Blorgons? Oh, they're fine, Riley said casually. We relocated them to a lovely pocket dimension where they can crack all the planets they want without bothering anyone. They seem quite happy there, actually. Last we checked, they'd built a very impressive civilization based entirely around competitive planet destruction. They've got leagues and everything. You relocated an entire interstellar empire to another dimension? It seemed like the polite thing to do, Riley shrugged. Much better than what we did to the Vorgax. Despite every instinct screaming at him to stop asking questions, Admiral Vextar couldn't help himself. What did you do to the Vorgax? Well, the Vorgax had this interesting philosophy about conquering species by turning them into living weapons. They'd show up, abduct a few million inhabitants, perform some really unpleasant biological modifications, and then use the modified beings as soldiers to conquer other worlds. Very efficient, very cruel, and very much against our no enslaving humans policy. Riley paused to check something off screen, as if he were reviewing a shopping list. So, we convinced their entire species that they were actually small, harmless creatures called space hamsters. They now live in elaborate tube networks and subsist primarily on sunflower seeds. They're much happier this way, and significantly less genocidal. Captain Zorb was now hyperventilating. Sir, that's reality manipulation on a scale that should require the energy output of an entire star. Should require, yes, Riley agreed. But that's assuming you're working within the standard laws of physics. We found it much easier to just convince the laws of physics to be more flexible. Turns out the universe runs on something surprisingly similar to customer service rules. If you're polite and persistent enough, you can usually get reality to make an exception for you. Admiral Vextar was beginning to understand why the Galactic Council had looked so uncomfortable during his presentation. How many species have you relocated? Oh, let's see. Riley consulted what appeared to be a tablet. We've got 43 species in various pocket dimensions, about 120 that we've convinced to pursue non-violent hobbies, 37 that we've redirected to unpopulated galaxies where they can conquer empty space to their heart's content, and one that we accidentally turned into a really excellent jazz ensemble. The Harmonious Collective of Tau Ceti puts on a fantastic show, by the way. This is impossible, Vextar whispered. Admiral, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means, Riley said, with amusement. Would you like to see something that's actually impossible? Before Vextar could answer, one of the human ships in the welcoming committee began to change. It folded in on itself in ways that hurt to look at, becoming simultaneously larger and smaller, until it resembled something that existed in about 7 dimensions more than should technically be possible. That's the USS Escher, Riley explained conversationally. She's our newest interdimensional scout ship. Her captain is technically in 3 different realities at once, which makes staff meetings a bit awkward. But she's very effective at exploring areas of space that don't technically exist yet. The ship then unfolded back into its original configuration, as if the laws of physics had decided to pretend the whole thing never happened. Of course, Riley continued, that's nothing compared to what we can do with weaponry. Would you like to see our defensive capabilities? No, Admiral Vextar said quickly. No, that won't be necessary. Are you sure? Because we've got this really interesting gravity inverter that we've been wanting to test. It makes things fall upward instead of downward. Very disorienting for invading fleets, we're told. Captain Zorb tugged urgently at his admiral's sleeve. Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures from all 6 human vessels. Power levels that shouldn't be possible without antimatter reactors the size of moons. Oh, those aren't energy signatures, Riley corrected cheerfully. Those are just our engines idling. We run on what you might call weaponized optimism. It's a renewable resource, and it has the added benefit of making everyone feel better about themselves. Admiral Vextar slumped in his command chair, feeling like a schoolyard bully who just discovered his intended victim was actually a professional wrestler in disguise. What do you want from us? Want from you? Riley looked genuinely puzzled. Admiral, we don't want anything from you. We're perfectly happy right where we are, doing our own thing. The question is, what do you want from this situation? Because I can tell you right now, conquest isn't on the menu. Good afternoon. Then what are our options? Riley brightened considerably. Oh, we've got lots of options. You can turn around and go home with a nice story about how you discovered Earth but decided it wasn't worth the trouble. We can set you up with coordinates for several uninhabited systems that are just perfect for colonial expansion. Or, if you're really interested in conquest, we know of at least 6 species that are actively looking for someone to conquer them. Apparently it's some sort of cultural tradition. species that want to be conquered. The Voluntary Subjugation Coalition of the Outer Rim. Lovely people, very polite, excellent at being conquered. They've got it down to an art form. Parades, surrender ceremonies, the works. Much more satisfying than trying to subdue someone who's just going to turn you into a jazz ensemble. Admiral Vextar looked around his bridge one more time, taking in the faces of his crew. They were all staring at him with expressions that clearly said, "Please, for the love of all that is holy, take option number 1. "The first option," he said finally. "We'll take the first option." "Excellent choice, Admiral," Riley said with the satisfaction of a customer service representative who'd successfully talked someone out of returning a perfectly good toaster. "I'll have our navigation department upload some coordinates for your journey home. Scenic route, too. You'll pass by the Aurora Nebula, which is particularly lovely this time of galactic year." Admiral Vextar managed a weak nod. "That's very kind of you. Oh, and Admiral, one more thing. When you get back to Zephyrian space, you might want to update your intelligence files. The whole Earth is defenseless thing is really starting to get around the galaxy, and frankly, it's becoming a bit of a nuisance. We're getting about 3 invasion attempts per month now, and it's really cutting into our productivity." "What exactly do you produce?" Captain Zorb asked, despite himself. "Mostly entertainment media and really good coffee," Riley replied. "Oh, and we're working on a solution to that whole heat death of the universe problem. Should have that wrapped up by next Thursday." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the inevitable victory in stunned silence. After a long moment, Admiral Vextar stood up on shaky legs and addressed his crew. "Navigation, set course for home, maximum warp, and someone get me a very strong drink." As the Zephyrian fleet began its hasty retreat from the Sol system, Captain Zorb approached his admiral with the hangdog expression of someone who just realized he'd been confidently explaining quantum physics to a class full of actual quantum physicists. "Sir, what do we tell the High Command?" Admiral Vextar rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on that would probably last for several light years. "We tell them the truth, Captain. Earth is unsuitable for conquest due to logistical complications." "Logistical complications? Would you prefer I tell them we were politely but firmly told to go home by a species that uses happiness as a fuel source and considers relocating entire civilizations to other dimensions a reasonable form of conflict resolution?" Captain Zorb considered this. "Logistical complications it is, sir." 3 weeks later, Admiral Vextar stood before the Galactic Council once again, though this time his posture was considerably more humble. The Great Hall buzzed with anticipation as representatives from across the galaxy waited to hear about the conquest of Earth. "Fellow Council members," Vextar began, his voice lacking its earlier bombast, "I stand before you today to report that the Zephyrin Empire has decided to postpone our expansion into the Sol system." A collective murmur of unsurprised acknowledgement swept through the chamber. Chancellor Griselda's eye stalks drooped, in what might have been sympathy or barely suppressed amusement. "Earth," Vextar continued, choosing his words very carefully, "presents certain unique challenges that require further study before any military action can be considered viable." Commander Thok cleared his throat with his usual boulder grinding sound. "Admiral, would you say these challenges are similar to those encountered by the Blorgon Empire, the Vorgak Collective, and the Crimson Armada of Zirion Prime?" Admiral Vextar paused, finally understanding the elephant in the room that everyone had been too polite to mention. "Commander Thok, are you telling me that other species have already attempted to conquer Earth?" "Attempted being the operative word," Thok rumbled. "The Galactic Council has maintained an informal understanding regarding Earth for approximately 2 centuries now. We call it the Don't Poke the Sleeping Dragon Accord. Why didn't anyone tell me this during my original presentation?" Ambassador Pip squeaked up from his tiny podium. "With all due respect, Admiral, you seemed quite confident in your research. We assumed you must have known about Earth's special status and had some sort of plan to deal with it." Chancellor Griselda's voice carried a note of gentle reproach. "Admiral, Earth isn't actually a secret. They're listed in the Galactic Registry under friendly, non-aligned entities with reality adjustment capabilities. It's right there in Section 847B of the Diplomatic Archives. Section 847B, Admiral Vexstar repeated weakly, remembering Captain Riley's casual mention of Contact Event 847B. They even send us a fruit basket every Galactic New Year, Ambassador Pip added helpfully. Very thoughtful people, the humans. The apples are particularly good. Commander Thok nodded his massive stone head. Earth serves as what you might call the galaxy's unofficial peacekeeping force. When the Andromedans started that whole consume all organic matter phase about 50 years ago, the humans convinced them to switch to competitive gardening instead. Much less messy. The humans also helped mediate the great cephalopod crustacean war of Sector 12, Chancellor Griselda added. Turned out the whole conflict was based on a translation error in a seafood recipe. Admiral Vexstar sank into his chair, feeling the weight of cosmic embarrassment settling on his shoulders. So you're telling me that Earth is essentially the galactic equivalent of that quiet neighbor who everyone knows not to bother, because they've got a black belt and a very creative approach to problem solving? That's actually a remarkably accurate analogy, Commander Thok admitted. Though I'd add that they're also the neighbor who brings cookies to block parties and helps you move furniture when you ask nicely. The motion before the Council, Chancellor Griselda announced with barely concealed amusement, is to officially add the Zephyrian Empire to Earth's Learned Their Lesson database, with a notation of polite withdrawal under the resolution column. All in favor? A unanimous chorus of "Aye" echoed through the chamber. As the council meeting adjourned and representatives filed out, Admiral Vexstar remained in his seat, staring at the chamber's ornate ceiling and contemplating the cosmic joke he'd just become the punchline to. Captain Zorb approached hesitantly. "Sir? The crew is asking what our next military objective should be." Admiral Vexstar stood up slowly, adjusted his uniform, and managed a rueful smile. "Captain, I think our next objective should be to find that voluntary subjugation coalition that Captain Riley mentioned. After today, the idea of conquering someone who actually wants to be conquered sounds refreshingly straightforward. And somewhere in the Sol system, Captain Riley filed his report on Contact Event 847B, marked it as resolved, standard outcome, and went back to his coffee, secure in the knowledge that the galaxy was spinning along just fine, exactly the way humanity preferred it.